So hi Nick, welcome to the pod. It's great to have you here today. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Nice to meet you again, George. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Pleasure. Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Cold day here in London. So let's kick it off. Do you mind telling me a bit about yourself and what you do?
No problem. I am an integrated consultant. So, an integrated consultant is just like a traditional management consultant, but the difference is that you actually become part of the organization while you're consulting for that organization. And that is pretty much the main difference. I've been doing that for the last decade almost. And at the moment, my main business or activity is a new consultancy that I'm building here in London.
Brilliant. As you know, I'm a consultant myself, or previously was a consultant, so I'm very familiar with that. And I think the integrated approach it will have much more of an impact on the organizations, which is brilliant. So let's step it back to the start. Where did your journey begin?
I was 16. I was still in high school, and I was trying to find out what I want to do with my life. Because I was in a profiled school, so essentially I was studying with foreign languages. I knew that wasn't my thing at all. And back then, my family was involved in an insurance business in Bulgaria. So I thought, let's give it a go. Why not? I was already 16. It was legal for me to actually work and start gaining some experience. So I joined, and that sort of kicked off my career in financial services. I got certified as a financial consultant level 1, which is like the lowest level. It's not even a certification per se, but it gives you the opportunity to actually work at a company like that. And that is what built the foundation of what later on became what I call the integrated financial consulting service that is part of my overall package. But that also wasn't my thing. And it just showed me that I wanted to focus more on the strategic part of the business rather than its financial or any particular side at all. I wanted to be more agnostic across departments, across functions, and so on. So, thanks to that position, even though very entry level, I found out what I wanted to do. Soon after that, I embarked on a very rigorous mentorship program with one of the biggest entrepreneurs in Bulgaria. And that is what really showed me what the business world is like. I found out how some of the biggest deals are done and how different it is when compared to movies, when compared to podcasts that you listen to, YouTubers talking about their success and so on. And that really solidified my position as a business architect. So technically, I am a business architect and a software architect, and that is what I put together at the beginning of my consultancy journey.
So how would you define a business architect? What is the role?
So a business architect is a person that comes into your organization to design either a new activity, a new department, a new product, service, and to see it through. So it comes from pretty much the word itself, architect. But the idea is that as a business architect, you not only design it and leave just like an architect, but you're actually the person that builds it after. So that is the integrated bit. And that is why I go with an integrated consultant rather than just a business architect, because that is the gap in the market that I realized is the main issue with consultancies back then, and probably even more so today.
Absolutely. And so you're obviously very young and you've built up a lot of experience to be able to deliver this consultancy. So what are the businesses you founded? We've spoken before, you've set up a range of different companies across a number of different sectors. So talk me through the first one, where it all got started, which was a tech company, I believe.
Well, the first one that actually worked was a tech company, because I had a few companies before that were just complete failures from the start. But the first company that actually worked out was a tech company. It was a company that was building essentially a booking software for car washes in Bulgaria. And not just Bulgaria, actually, but that was further down the line. But that's how we started. We were building a software, and about a year down the line, we got a partner that was going to help us with the scaling of that software, because we reached the ceiling of what we could do. I mean, we were kids in reality. That's it. We were kids. A lot of the business side of the actual software development that we were doing, we didn't understand because everybody that we were in competition with was 30, 40 years in the industry. And we didn't know what to expect. So we got a partner that was helping us with the scaling of that business. And we focused a lot more on sales. And soon after, we got an exit offer, which was, in retrospect, I think I can say it now because it's been more than 5 years, a very hostile takeover. That's what it was because, again, we were kids. We didn't know what to expect. It was our first exit offer. We had no idea how to even negotiate. We had no idea who to get to negotiate for us or advise us or anything like that. Our only advisor was pretty much our lawyer back then, which is not even a full lawyer because Bulgaria has a different setup. It's sort of like an associate, really. And they tried to help us get some advice, but in reality, my two business partners back then just got intimidated up to a point where they just said, let's just go. Because we either get something and we exit, or we stay, we get taken over and we get nothing. I didn't see it that way, but that's ultimately what we ended up doing. So it really depends on the conversation that I'm having, if I count that as a win or not. So from a general business owner's perspective, that should be a win. But as a business architect, I can see that company could have 10x'd literally a year from where we left. But yeah, that's essentially what we were doing.
And it sounds like an incredibly steep learning curve, something you took on so young. So what have you learned since? You've done a number of ventures. What have you applied from that experience? And then what are the businesses you've created?
The only thing that comes to mind when it comes to that business specifically is stand your ground. I say that to absolutely everyone now, every day. Especially when I'm consulting and there is either an exit offer or there is a merger coming up or anything. Stand your ground. That's what I learned from that business because I know that if we did that, we would have made a lot more, not just money-wise, but experience, impact, just everything. And I think that I've been applying that ever since. Very soon after we exited that company, I decided that I'm going to be an independent consultant. And I used all of the connections that I had, which was next to none, but back then, to actually get projects of mine. And because of the fact that I was used to, as you mentioned, the learning curve that we had with the tech company, the process did not intimidate me of getting clients of my own, even though I was literally still a kid. It did not intimidate me. And I think that standing my own ground was what established my presence within the business world back then. And as I said, I've been applying that ever since. I've been teaching that because I do a bit of mentoring as well. So the one takeaway from that business is that standing your ground.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. You've got to back yourself all the way. And so you mentioned mentorships there again. I believe they've played quite a large role in your career. How important do you think mentors are, and how would you encourage someone to go and find the correct mentor for them?
I think it depends on your personality type, but for people like me that are always looking for someone to look up to, I think it's extremely detrimental. Without having someone to actually guide you through the steps of building your career, building your business, building your even base knowledge in business, I don't think that you can do much. Because for me, my mentorship program was almost 2 years, and it was more than a full-time job. Full-time jobs are 40 hours a week. I was working at least 60 for my mentor, literally. And I think that's what helped me learn the basis of business, and it helped me establish that database of sources of information, of even advisors, of pretty much anything that you would need when building a business, when scaling a business, at least back then, to then help me on basically in my ventures throughout my career. As I mentioned earlier, I saw some of the biggest deals happen in front of me. I was working as a translator for him as well because we were doing international deals. And I think that's what really helped me understand how you structure a proper business deal through, now in retrospect, the legal channels. Because there's a lot of business that gets done as people say, under the table.
Yes.
But that's when I actually saw how it's done in the light and how it's structured properly and how much hard work goes into it and how many people are behind the actual negotiator of that deal. We were a whole team of people, from marketing consultants to business consultants to legal consultants to literally anything you can think of, to this day, what I've been just copying and pasting to different businesses.
Yeah. So it was an incredibly formative experience.
Extremely. Very stressful at the
Yeah.
time. This is what I tell people as well, because most of the people that I mentor, even though I don't focus on that at all, at any point in time, I don't have more than 5 people that I mentor. And I say that to everyone at the beginning. This is probably going to be the most frustrating, stressful, difficult thing that you've done ever in business, because I'm there to help you, but I'm not there to teach you. So I'm not going to be holding your hand. I'm not going to be telling you how to do things. I'm just going to tell you what you need to do.
Yep.
You need to figure it out for yourself. That's it. Just as an example, I give most people a list of essentially different subjects, topics, and even sometimes bullet points of different parts of business. Most of the times we start with jurisdictional setup. And I tell them, you just need to find out anything and everything about X, Y, Z, without actually giving them an actual question, an actual specified topic for them to go and research, or even the sources.
Yep.
Because that's how I was taught. One of the first assignments that I was given was a single sentence. Find out everything about X company. What does that mean? So that is the real learning curve there, being able to specify what you're supposed to do by yourself.
Which is often a challenge. And it sounds like, as we said, you learned a lot during that experience there, which you've gone on to apply to a number of businesses. So you now operate across multiple jurisdictions, as you mentioned, and across multiple different sectors. So could you provide an overview of what those businesses are and what they do?
No problem. I still have tech companies. I have 2 tech companies they're not mine. I'm a shareholder, but I founded them. I have 2 tech companies. I have 2 construction companies. So those are in Bulgaria, Germany, and Austria. Then we have my sales agency and my branding agency, again, Bulgaria, Germany, Switzerland, and the US. And then we have the business consultancy, which is the business and people consultancy based here.
Yeah.
That is what I do. And those are my direct businesses, if that makes sense. I've also invested in different ventures as an angel investor, but I'm what they call a NED, a non-executive director. And I think I'm the most non-executive director ever, because I'm just there for either Q reviews or annual reviews, really, if that. I as I said, I don't teach by teaching. I teach by essentially helping people teach themselves. That is what I do. So even the businesses that I invest in, I don't go and essentially help them make the business successful directly. I teach them how to teach themselves what they need to know. So those are the main activities at the moment for me.
Amazing. And so from someone that was an ex-consultant, as I've mentioned, I find it amazing that you're able to operate across all those different sectors, because previously someone like myself would be industry aligned. You operate in a small niche and that's where you focus. And I'd love to know how you make your knowledge apply across all of these different areas. What similarities are there and how are you able to have an impact across quite a broad spectrum?
Let's start with my weak side of business. I'm very open when it comes to it, and that's the legal side of business. I never learned that up to, I think, where I need to actually know it.
Yeah.
So I always have people that work with me on the legal setups, even when it comes to jurisdictional setups, when it comes to, for example, working with hedge funds, because a lot of the times we consult for hedge funds. When it comes to that, I don't even do the deals myself, because I know that it needs to be someone that knows exactly what the payment structure is going to look like, because they all hedge and essentially work through Cayman, they work through Canary Islands, they work through Switzerland, and it's an extremely difficult thing. So that's my weak side of business, essentially setting up the legal structure behind it. But in terms of how I apply what I've learned, number one is always vetting process, creating an extremely rigorous vetting process for anybody that's going to be part of the business.
Yep.
So that's partners, that's going to be even employees when we get to there. That's going to be suppliers, that'll even be the actual companies that we take on as clients. well, if it's going to be a company or an individual, but the vetting process, I think, is the most important thing. If you get that wrong, everything will be wrong from that point forward. So the vetting process I learned from one of the government officials of the Netherlands. I can't say too much about it, but we were working on a growth project for the infrastructure of construction businesses in Austria. And essentially the grants and loans that they were able to get against non-secured assets. So essentially, when we were working together, I saw the process that he had and how relentless he was with his vetting. There was not a thing that he didn't know about the people he was working with, even though he hadn't spent months or even years, as people here in the UK do, getting to know someone. He had spent maybe a couple of days with them, but he would know everything about them. Like, they have 2 kids, one 5, one 7 years old, one girl, one boy. They study at a private school. Very nice people. His wife does XYZ. So they know everything about these people, because at the end of the day, even in business, what dictates what kind of a person you are is not just what you do in your professional life, but what you do in your personal life as well. That's what he believed. And that's what I believe to date as well. But when I saw that vetting process, I started copying it across everything I did, because I saw that there was no errors, none. There were no people falling out. There were no mishaps. There was just nothing that actually went wrong with that project since the beginning, because everything was just happening during the vetting process. He was able to fish out all that information. So that's number one. The structural setup of a business I learned from my mentor, which was essentially setting up the entire business before you actually start operating rather than afterwards. So most businesses say, and even entrepreneurs that I work with and have worked with say, let's just get going and we're going to figure things out as we go. That gives me nightmares straight away, because I have no idea how we're going to figure things out if we actually get them to where we want to get them. The scales that people usually tend to operate on, that I work with at least, are always in the millions straight away. So we launch a business, that's it, we're in the millions. And can you imagine having a business within the millions without a structure? You don't have a set of SOPs. You don't have an actual business plan to go through. You don't have a marketing plan. You don't have a sales plan. You don't have a team structure. And with that, we can go even into more detail. Like, you don't even have suppliers set up. You don't have project management processes done. You have nothing. In my experience, setting up the business structurally is always the best thing to do when you're actually building a real business. If it's just a test, if you're just testing things, if it's a side hustle, as people say, fine, that's different. But when you're building an actual business, the structural setup is the most important thing. And since I learned that, my planning stage is almost 3 times longer than anyone else's. But then my execution time frame is much shorter, because everything's in place. There's nothing to actually optimize. If anything, we actually start scaling when we're supposed to be optimizing processes. Structural setup is number 2. And then the third thing that I need to say is market research. That's the first thing that I've learned. And again, to go back to your original question, how do I apply them across different businesses? I think it's very logical, without me even saying that those things are very industry agnostic. You can apply them to pretty much any business. But market research is, I think, the third most important thing after the 2 that I just mentioned, because you need to know who you're going to be in competition with, what's out there, how you position yourself, how you plan out your penetration strategy as well, because people usually say there's 2 or 3 general ones, but you just change one thing about them and they're already different. That's it. That's just the world that we live in. But without proper market research that is going to give you the answers for you, without you even having to ask the question, I don't think that you can plan for the business in an appropriate way. You don't know what to expect, because you don't know what the competitors are doing. You don't know what the clients want. And this is another factor within market research. There's passive, there's active market research, or how people like to call it, preliminary or secondary. I focus on a combination of both, no matter the resources. So it can be one focus group that we do, but we must have a preliminary part of our market research done for any project. If we don't have the people factor added there. We just have numbers.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell you. Most numbers are tinkered with. Everybody
Absolutely.
fixes them up.
Yes.
So you can't really trust those. So usually when we launch, especially a physical product, the preliminary research is a must. It's an actual must. What's your experience with market research?
Yeah, market research, I've done tons of it, and it's intense. You have to put in a lot of effort in. And I think there's, as you say, it's interesting. I can spin a number any way you want me to spin it. So I think you just have to look at the core principles of what's going on in the market. Is there traction there? Is there supply? Is there demand? Which way is it heading? And that's the core things I often look for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just interested. Again, I'm just flipping this
Yeah,
podcast now on
absolutely.
you, but I'm interested. Do you resonate with the three things that I said? What do you think? Does it, as a consultant, because you are a consultant, do you think that you can apply them pretty much straight away as concepts? Or do you think they're very, again, person specific?
No, I think they can definitely be applied by anyone, and particularly the vetting one is key. That's something we spend a lot of time over. Who are our clients? What are their intentions? What are we trying to get out of it? And what do they want from us? You need to do a lot of research before you get into bed with anyone, ultimately, to make sure your principles, you're aligned, and the direction you're heading. And I was listening to a talk by Sam Altman this morning about the importance of being a generalist. And I think the points you made there resonated a lot with me in regards to that, because as you mentioned, you operate across this wide spectrum, but what you've got are core principles that you're able to apply to lots of different industries to ensure you're successful across the board. And I think that people often get too focused about their particular niche, which is great to operating in a small fixed environment. But as soon as you take it beyond that, they struggle. And I think that's where you've excelled by the sound of it.
That's a very good way to put it. That is a very good way to put it. But again, it's all about innovating with
Yeah.
time. So those processes are essentially the foundation for business, but the actual matter that you work with, the shape it takes depends on the market conditions. Like right now, I keep saying to everyone, because I do a lot of macro expansion analysis. I think we talked about it the other day, but because of that, I keep telling people, if you're about to launch a business, that's part of so the market is divided in two, right? Want and need. If you are about to launch a business that is part of the want sector, don't even bother. It's not the right time. That's very simple. It's not the right time. People don't have extra cash to do whatever they want to do with it. But when it comes to launching a need business, which at the moment people have 4 or 5 needs at any point in time. You need food and water, you need shelter, you need healthcare, you need education. Anywhere from there is just wants,
Yes.
pretty much.
Yeah.
So as long as your business fits within those criteria, I think that you're going to be good. And that's why, as I said, you need to be very flexible when it comes to applying those concepts, because we can go with the structural setup of a business, let's say. But if that business is within the want sector of the market at the moment, that doesn't matter. So you need to be very innovative when it comes to that. You need to find a way to make a business that's in the want sector be part of the need sector as well. So that's very simply, imagine that you're launching an exclusive sushi restaurant with a well-known Japanese chef. Okay, fantastic, but that's not a need. That's a very want type of a business. So let's let's make that exclusive, and maybe 1 to 2 days a week when he's actually going to be there and he's going to be cooking for you, usually in front of you.
Yeah.
And let's make the rest of the days just a normal sushi restaurant. So that's, again, that now then is just sustenance. It's food. We need it. We need to eat. We're sick of eating sandwiches every day. Let's go get sushi.
Yeah.
5-minute sushi. There you go. So that then is a need. I need food. Simple. I want a new phone. That's a perfect example.
Yes.
So yeah.
Interesting. And I often think about businesses from problem-based. So you start by solving a problem, and I think that's very similar to your need-based example. My problem would be I'm hungry. That's a need. I solve it by getting food from the sushi restaurant. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of macro factors at the moment which are making business incredibly challenging at all jurisdictions and many of the ones you operate in. What's your approach to balancing that across the board, and how do you navigate that sort of global environment across the different regions you operate in?
What I focus on is on cross-country operations
Yeah.
with every business that I have. So I try to keep myself essentially as part of the global economy rather than a local/national economy.
Yeah.
Because when you focus on a specific country, there is a lot of pros to that, but the cons always outweigh them, always. I think a perfect example of that is Dubai. So a lot of businesses focused on moving to Dubai in the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
It depends on which part of the world we're looking at. US 10 years, here 5. If we look at that as a perfect example, everything was great until they realized that the market is starting to mature over there. It's starting to get too saturated. It's starting to actually hit a bottleneck of growth. And to fix that, what did they do? They introduced corporate tax. They introduced additional fees when it comes to business. So most of these things were free. And if your entire business was focused, or rather your business's profit was focused on that, or was completely reliant on that specific factor, your business was gone, essentially. So this is a perfect example because one of my businesses is there. So what we did is we started working with countries around it, like Saudi. We started working even with Pakistan. Interestingly enough, most people don't look that way, but we started working with them. After that, we moved even more into the Middle East. And again, cross-country risk management is the method that I use for my businesses. That helps us grow our businesses depending on what's going on politically, economically, with that country, with that region. Even here in the UK with the Labour government now, the market is divided into two. People that think that this is doomsday for business and people that see it as an opportunity. And they're actually waiting for even more resources to come in now because it's a Labour government, right? We need to pump more money into the economy. So they're trying to take advantage of that. But while that was happening, do you think there was a period of essentially stagnant growth in the UK because of the change of government, because of the issues due to Brexit and so on? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think since COVID, it's been a really interesting time. Obviously, we had a lot, COVID, full on lockdown, businesses shut. We had a lot of money pumped into the economy through the various furlough schemes, all the track and trace, all of that pumped a lot of money in, and we reached record highs in terms of government spending. So that was an interesting environment to operate in for sure. We then went through a successive run of prime ministers. I think we had 3 in about 2 years, which is unheard of. We had Liz Truss crashing the economy. So I think from a business perspective, it's been very hard to operate in that environment. Lots of unknowns. And I think completely you're right. We've entered that period of stagnation, which is why I think this next Labour government will be really interesting, because hopefully it provides more of a at least certain trajectory. Businesses can plan, they can think about where things are going, they can adjust and hopefully grow. Obviously, we're not forecast to grow at a particularly brilliant rate. It's around 1.5%, and that was before the tariffs that we're expecting from the Trump administration. So it will be interesting to see what this next 4 or 5 years shapes up to be like. And from that perspective, I'm interested to see what you think about the UK as a place to do business. As I've mentioned, we're not targeting high growth, and I think I read that our productivity gap to the G7 is 16% below the average, which is hugely significant, and I think productivity is one of the major problems we have. So what do you think of the UK as a place to do business?
Purely statistically, the UK market is the second most developed market in the world. If you speak to a British person, they'll say as the first, but
Yes.
as the second most developed market in the world, and any business that's able to make it here will be able to make it anywhere. Now, the reason for that is not just competition. It's not just saturation. It's not the impeccable management of supply demand. It's the fact that the barriers to entry are more than just business. There's a huge cultural gap between businesses here. And there's a big reason why, again, purely statistically, French businesses make it over here 2 to 3 times quicker than any other business. And the reason for that is because people know what the other end is like. They know how to manage those relationships. They're aware how the two ends do business. And because of that, they're able to go through those barriers much quicker or even skip past them. What I think about the UK market is that me personally, I want to be part of it. I want to grow a business here. But I think that it's one of the most difficult ones to actually learn how to integrate yourself within it. From a cultural perspective, for me, I even see the productivity difference between different countries, because to me, I'm usually used to, let's say, start to finish to turn over a deal within 2 to 3 months. Whereas here, sometimes it can take up to 2 years. And it doesn't matter what it's about. Literally, it can be property, it can be even software, anything. So things that happen with a snap of your fingers anywhere else just take forever here. But here's the big difference. And I've heard people from all over the world say the same thing. The approach to business, when you compare the UK to the US will try 10 times and succeed once. The UK will try twice and succeed once. So the success rate is 50% here when compared to 10% in the US. That is the big difference. So it happens much slower, but the fail rate is much, much lower as well. I think that's part of the overall culture. People are much more aware of what they need to be careful with over here. Project management, completely different. Employee relations, completely different. People don't even call it HR here anymore. They call it people department. So it's very different over here when it comes to business, and every company that enters the UK market essentially develops another business unit that is specifically for the UK that cannot be cross-country, which again, if we go back to the previous topic, defeats the purpose of most of my businesses trying to be cross-country. So that's the biggest barrier for me to entry. And with the different businesses that I've been part of, I've seen the same thing happen across all of them. They operate very independently when compared to their branches in other countries, if they have them. And that is just the most confusing thing ever for me. It's like you have two businesses from now. It's not one. Even if you have a holding company, it has nothing to do with the rest. So do I want to be part of the UK market? Yes. Do you want to be part of the UK market? Absolutely. Can you be? I have no idea. We need to find out.
So approaching it from quite an objective perspective, how would you go about changing that? What do you think could be done to make the UK a better place to do business?
I think that risk tolerance is probably the biggest factor. And I think that starting up even more, I know that the government is trying. I know that different organizations are trying to start business augmentation programs or launchpads that are essentially there for that reason, to test businesses before. And even though they try to do it, I think that's just not enough. The scale they do it on is just so small that it will never ever meet the demand of business. So every year there is more than 100,000 new businesses in the UK, literally. So I think that risk tolerance needs to be managed through government programs, incentives, business launch pads. Even universities can take charge of that, because one of my, I think, biggest achievements during my educational period was going through a sales academy that was all about testing everything you do every day as you go. So you learn something, you apply it next day. You learn something, you apply it next day, sometimes next hour. And that was literally done for the sole purpose of ruling out the people that are not going to end up doing anything apart from creating debt. So I think that risk tolerance needs to be managed in a different way. Even, as I said, universities can do that through programs, through mentorships, through even facilitating business concept testing. So what can that look like? Imagine that your final year as a bachelor student in, I don't know, business management, you get, instead of an assignment that's just completely useless and it will not add any value to you or anybody that reads it ever, and it will be forgotten the moment you graduate, you'll never even look at it again. Instead of that, you get to test an actual business, and the success of that test will be the grade that you get for that. I think that just makes so much more sense than, hey, go research this XY made up business and write a paper on it of 15,000 words. I think that if universities focus on developing programs to test businesses and entrepreneurs as they are learning, and it doesn't matter what level that is, bachelor's, it can be master's, it can be MBA, it can be doctorate, it can be anything. While that is being done through an educational body, it's just going to be risk-free for the person doing it. And the entire tolerance part will be completely abolished. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think you make a brilliant point there. And I was actually chatting to someone recently who works at King's College, London, very well-known university in the medical space, and they work in the incubator scheme there. And I think that's a prime example of the sort of thing that should be encouraged more. Because as you say, It's a time when students often have a lot of time to think, come up with these ideas in a completely risk-free environment. And you can roll that out, they can experiment. And I think you'll get a lot of great ideas that way for sure. And I think, as you mentioned before, the UK has a pretty low risk tolerance. And I think, we start 2 businesses compared to the 10 in the US, for example. And I think that's just a cultural thing. It's much harder for people here to take that risk, I think, just the way we are. And I think encouraging that more would go a long way. And I was reading the other day that only 5 out of the world's top 100 businesses are based in the UK. And I think that's a lot to do with our approach to innovation, risk-taking, but also, as you mentioned, the sort of cultural differences between operating in the UK and beyond.
Absolutely. That's a very interesting statistic, actually. 5 out of 100.
Yeah.
So that's 95%. Wow. But I think that realistically, even those 5 did not do it by themselves. One life hack or cheat to do that is to get a partner over here.
Yeah.
But that is, again, as difficult as it is to launch a business, finding that partner. Because if you just get someone that's already established here and knows how the market works, it's going to be much easier for your business to set itself up and grow, or even just integrate itself. Not even about growth, it's just about proving concept.
Yeah.
But I think that's even as, if not more difficult than starting a business. But if you can do that, if you have those connections, I think that's going to make the process a lot quicker and easier.
Absolutely. And so we've talked a lot about the successes in business today. And I know you've had a journey with successes and some ventures that haven't worked out. I wondered if you could dive a little more into those. Tell me some of the things that went wrong, what you've learned from it, and what advice you could give to others to avoid making those mistakes.
So I can start from the beginning. I have a lot more of those than I have successes. A lot more. Let's start with my first company. That was a marketing company. I'm not saying agency because it wasn't an agency, but it was a marketing company, traditional marketing, print. We were focusing on essentially marketing small businesses, and we were working with the smallest of the small businesses in Bulgaria. The reason why we failed there is because we focused so much on the side of the market that was so price sensitive that it ate all of our profits before we even began making money.
Yep.
So I learned to control the outcome of any business activity by focusing on the projected profitability. Again, a lot of people say, let's test it out. We don't need to be profitable from the get-go. But even if that is true, and in some cases that is true, you need to have the projected profit up until when you will actually become profitable. Because you can't operate at a loss forever. So that business failed purely because of the fact that our profit was not big enough to cover everything after we got all the work done. So we couldn't even pay ourselves.
Yeah.
So that business taught me that profitability needs to be on the map from the get-go. It's not just the experience. Because a lot of people think like, I need to get experience and that's going to help me become profitable. Okay, yes, sure, great. But how are you going to pay the bills during that time? Next business that had failed was a construction business. It failed purely because of the fact that we relied too much on our partners that we're working with. I'm not in any way, shape, or form a construction person. I know nothing about the actual building process. I can explain it to you from a documentation point of view, from a process point of view. I can explain the business behind it, but I have no clue what you need to do on site. So even more so back then when we were working with our partners, again, going back to the vetting process, when we were working with our partners, and because I skipped the vetting process because of the person that I went into business with, that business failed because of the fact that our partners essentially took all of the profits and left nothing for us. That's exactly what happened. And again, that then showed me that when it comes to finding a business partner, it's probably even more important to have a rigorous vetting process. So again, it was learning about applying that process to every part of your business. That was the main outcome of that. But after that, I failed multiple other agencies that I started, and I've tried to grow in different markets. I've tried to enter the Indian market, didn't work out, just impossible. I tried to enter the Bangladeshi market, didn't work out. Cultural differences, so that taught me that sometimes you do actually need an agent on the other side to help you start up a business. And that's really the reality of the failures that I've had, is just showing you that no matter how much you know, you don't know enough.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. And it's hard to know what you don't know, I think, a lot of the time, but that's where you come to rely on other people and mistakes are easily made. So we're approaching the end of our conversation. I didn't know if there's any particular points you wanted to leave the listeners with, any words of advice.
what we just ended the last question with, continuously learning. I think that's the most important thing. I think a lot of people say it, but they don't really explain what they mean by that. I don't mean go and do another 4 degrees in university or go and take another 10 courses. Focus on your weakest side of doing business.
Yeah.
For most people, that's sales. That's sales. Even though Grant Cardone and Gary Vee are not going to like that a lot.
Yes.
I don't believe that every person is made for sales. And I don't believe that not learning about sales every day is not essentially the best way to grow even yourself as a person, because everything is selling.
Yeah.
An interview is selling. Going to a bazaar and negotiating the price from 100 pounds to 20 pounds is selling.
Yeah.
That's all selling. So if you learn that one skill, I think it's going to help with any business. And again, going back to what I said, continuous learning, that is only done through continuous testing. And continuous testing is done by increasing your risk tolerance.
Yep.
That's all I want to say. So if you're in business and you're afraid, then you should probably not be in business. Or rather, if you're in business and you're afraid and that stops you, you shouldn't be in business. If you're in business and you're afraid and that fuels you, go ahead. But if that stops you, you shouldn't be in business. I think that's all I want to say. And as I mentioned, with the Business and People Consultancy, which is my newest venture that I'm growing here in the UK, that is exactly what we focus on when it comes to growing businesses, essentially equipping them with the knowledge, with the expertise, with the skills to actually grow and set up the operations that they need to set up within a certain market, or even with M&A.
Yep.
Because that is another thing that we focus on, as well as capital raising. So if there is any questions whatsoever from anyone, or if anyone wants to have a chat about anything that we've discussed today, I'm more than open to it. I'll leave my contact details with you, and you can share them in the description or whatever.
Yep,
and I'd be happy to have a chat with anyone. But thanks for having me. I'd love to turn this podcast around one of those times so I can ask you a lot of questions, because now I have a lot of them. But that's all from me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot myself, and I'm sure the listeners will too. So thank you very much. It's been a brilliant conversation.
Thank you, George.